Welcome to Unite Now, conversations at the intersection of leadership and flourishing. We are about to dive into a new series of conversations. These conversations are going to be all about collaboration. What is it? How do we do it well? Where are we prone to mess up? What's hard about it? Just really, we're going to talk all around the subject of collaboration over the next few months. And I'm super excited that our first guest or first conversation is going to be with Zakiya Williams. She has been involved in collaboration in all kinds of ways and is part of leading in an organization that has collaboration in the name. So, I think that there's going to be just like a wealth of information and just experience, and both in the ways that successes, right? But then also in what's hard about it or where there have been mess ups, because that's just part of our journey. And with Unite, we like to talk about where we're prone to make mistakes or get it wrong, not in any way of like, oh, trying to condemn or judge, but just to be really honest about the fact that we're humans and we make mistakes and we learn in the conversation and in the reflection about those things. So anyways, I'm going to let Zakiya tell us about herself and what she does and what roles she plays right now. And so welcome, Zakiya. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Ruth. It's so
Yeah.
great to join you.
Oh man, I've been excited and looking forward to this conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then even just more importantly than what you do, sort of what makes you excited or passionate about this conversation?
My name is Zakiya Williams, and I co-lead a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm, Shepherd and Stone. And I also co-lead an initiative in Atlanta that you just referenced. It's called Atlanta Collaborative District. And in both of my roles with these two organizations, I work with marketplace, church, and nonprofit leaders to create measurable and strategic change in their organizations and in the local community.
Very good. Okay, so tell me what gets you excited about the conversation of collaboration.
I think there are a few things. Some of it is wiring. I am definitely wired for a more collective culture. Individualism is just not, it's not a personality trait that's strong in me. It's not necessarily very strong in my family or even my racial or ethnic background. Like it's just not, we are more often we's versus I's. And so I think whenever you have a collective culture or you have an orientation toward groupthink or an orientation toward considering the group or the whole, you are probably more prone to be a collaborator. Um, it's just kind of that part is wiring, but I think the other side to it is I just throughout my adult years and even as a young child, I learned and watched and experienced over and over again where individuals and groups of people who work well together and really lean on one another's strengths well and cover one another's weaknesses well are able to be well together and also build well together. And generally the stuff that comes out of healthy collaboration, the structures, ideas, organizations, systems, all the things that come out of healthy collaboration have a sturdiness to them and a longevity to them and a fruitfulness to them that fosters a lot of health.
Collaboration can mean a lot of things. Can you give us a picture? Can you tell us maybe a story of where you've seen impactful collaboration facilitated that's been healthy?
This is kind of more of a micro level, but I'll just tell the story and uh, hopefully it'll stick. So, in a season of my life, I worked in the financial planning industry and I worked with our team had about 6 people on it. And in our strongest season as a team, we had very differing personalities, very different skill sets, but a strong, clear objective of wanting to serve our clients well, wanting to make sure that we were well with one another, and wanting to be as efficient as possible in the accomplishing of our work. And I, um, I just recall many moments. Again, this would be I would particularly point to our strongest season together. But in our strongest season together, I remember there being multiple moments where something came our way that was outside of our control, whether it was a decision a client was making or a new policy or law that was being implemented by our federal policymakers. And we would have to kind of scramble like around how do we navigate this change? This is going to have a big impact. What will it take? What are the corners of this change that we really need to consider and weigh? And I just remember kind of among our 6 person team having, one woman who was thinking very carefully about how does the messaging land on the people we're speaking to. And another man thinking, how are we making sure we're bringing along in this conversation the wives of some of our clients who have traditionally felt like they've been left out? And we had a more administrative coordinating role. She was very much thinking through what are some things we can put in place as a team that will minimize the extra effort on the other team members so that the weight of this change isn't falling heaviest on one role. Um, and it just, and then we had, we had a details research kind of, I don't want to say nerd in a negative sense, but just the very analytical, detailed analytical teammate who is literally piecing together the law and strategizing around like what will we do different, like what opportunities are emerging for our clients in this. And I think having these different perspectives, um, we were able to just build out some plans that not only did it deliver like solid results for our clients, but it also gave them a wow experience from a like it wasn't just pretty but then empty and hollow on its inside. It was a sturdy plan that bore fruit, but it was also kind of sexy and cool, if you will, for our clients. And it was an energizing experience for our team versus it being a dread for one or two roles and an excitement for others. And so that's probably, I would point to that as like, again, that was a micro experience because we're all in the same industry. We're kind of all, there's a lot of alignment already, but I would say it was
Mhm.
very effective collaboration.
That's exciting. That's really cool. And it's so beautiful when you can see that come together, isn't it? When people kind of bring themselves to the table and they allow each other to be themselves and not try to sort of overshadow. But yeah, the collective voice together when it harmonizes is so beautiful, isn't it?
I do not disagree with you.
That's very good. So can you maybe talk about in order to do or to live out collaborative relationships in a healthy way, maybe what are some of the elements that you've seen that need to exist in those relationships in order, in order for the collaboration to be healthy?
Hmm. I think collaboration is an interesting word because it has like one component of it. One component of collaboration is kind of this togetherness, but then there's another component of collaboration that is like action and activity and decision making and doing. And um, I think when we currently live, if you're in the culture I'm in, which is Southern U.S. Culture here in Atlanta, I think we lean toward task orientation, kind of lean toward the doing and the activity and the innovation and stuff like that. And I think re- collaborative relationships they can't exist where there's no common goal. So, so if you don't have a common goal, I would not say you're collaborating. I would say you're coexisting and like enjoying and being kind to one another, which is fine, not bad. But you need to be doing something in order for it to be a collaboration. But I would say on the other side of it, it's like if the focus on the product is so high that the experience of the people is minimized or diminished or disregarded in its importance, then your collaboration tends to fall apart pretty quickly. And that's because people don't feel honored in the process. And so I really think for collaboration to be effective, you need trust amongst the parties that are involved. You need clear expectations around the willingness to protect relationship and protect honor and the needs of the different stakeholders at the table. I think you need a willingness to clarify the goal and the task at hand. I think you're going to need patience because there's a need to be more devoted to the group think than the task completion. And I would also say there needs to be a devotion toward the group completing the task versus an individual completing their portion. So I do think that there's a patience that's required. And I would say in our culture, there really is a little bit of a deconstructing that's required just because very, very rarely do we find ourselves in Atlanta at least building a collaborative work where people have a shared perspective around what makes collaboration work. So it's
Hmm.
like we say we want to do something collaboratively, but then everybody's coming to the table with very different views of what collaboration means. Um,
Hmm.
and that just requires a patience and a willingness to get in there with each other. And when I say patience, I don't just mean a willingness to wait and to move slower. I think it also requires the kind of patience that is a wrestling patience, where there is a commitment to going back and forth, going back and forth, going back and forth.
You had mentioned one of the things, and I don't know if I remember it exactly right, but it's sort of like you said, a clear expectation about how you honor and you protect each other. I
Mhm.
think maybe I don't know if I said that right. So clarify if I said it wrong, but I'd love to hear more about what you mean by that.
In my consulting firm, one of the things we call it is like equipping leaders to be imperfect well with each other. And our consulting team, talks with our clients about this idea of, if we're really humanizing others, then we don't expect perfection. And because we don't expect perfection, we actually anticipate the imperfect relational moments where conflict is going to come, where misunderstanding is going to come, where uh, pet peeves are going to have been triggered, where actual deep traumas might be triggered. And when we go into relationship that is across difference in particular, we really have to have the humility to say, like, I anticipate there's going to be some bumps in this road. Therefore, here are the ways we're going to wear our seatbelts. Here are the ways we're going to navigate the bumps. Here are the ways we're going to be well with each other through these moments of relational imperfection.
So you are anticipating that it's going to happen. So what do you do? What do you do when it does happen? How do you be well with each other when it happens? Do you have any thoughts about that? It's okay if you say no, but just any thoughts that come to your mind about that?
I think some of it's contextual, right? So
Hmm.
being well with each other in a marketplace setting in an industry where things move really quickly, like back when I was in financial planning, at 3:20 in the afternoon, all trades had to be processed. And so there's a way we have to be well with each other in that industry that's a little bit different than how we be well with each other, planting churches. And And so I do think preparing for conflict, preparing to repair relationships, stuff like that, there's some contextual reality to it. But I think foundationally, we're talking about things like knowing people's apology languages, uh, being having ahead of time the awareness of how does this person receive constructive feedback? What kind of constructive feedback? When are we committing to level setting as a group around unacceptable interpersonal realities? Um, so those are those are just some of the different things, but it's really almost like doing the hard work before the moment comes up, so that when the moment comes up, you can go back to your notes about, oh, Ruth said that you know, when she is hurt, this is how her hurt shows up. And so that's a cue for me that I might have hurt Ruth, not intentionally, but I might have hurt her. Or Ruth knows when Zakiya needs to be confronted. Zakiya said, these are the ways that I'm like, when you need to correct me, please consider correcting me in this way, because it's the easiest and most helpful way for me to receive what you're saying quickly and make the necessary adjustments. And so those are just some of the ways that we're kind of like, this needs to happen on the front end. And that, you know, there's a measure of that can be done between individuals, but then when you're leading an organization, it's your responsibility as a leader to bring your stakeholders together and level set around, what do we do with our different stakeholder groups? How do we normalize this value in our organizational culture? Things like that.
Mhm. That's good. That's good. And you mentioned the word humility, and I feel like people say talk about humility a lot, but what, like, if you when you say humility, what does the substance of that look like? What does humility feel like?
I said humility. I think another word I could have used in that particular circumstance would have been sobriety. So people joke about me and some of my different workspaces. They'll say, "Oh, here's Akia's. She's going at it again." But I say things like, "We need to be sober about this." And when I say that word, like we need to be sober, what I'm asking for of those who are listening and those who are in the room is, let's not pretend like things are better than they are in ourselves, in our interactions with each other, in the interactions between these groups. Let's not pretend. Let's not pretend like things are well when they're not. And I think for me in this particular context, humility is that it's having the courage to not gloss over um, present and real dynamics, and that includes in myself, right? It's like I have to expect that I'm going to drop the ball. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to make a sarcastic remark that hurts someone. My facial expressions are going to communicate something that hurts someone's feelings. Like, I've got to be sober about this stuff about me. Um, yeah. And for me, I think when I think of humility, I'm more often thinking like, are we willing to be honest and accountable about what's taking place?
I'm thinking, you're mentioning sometimes maybe there's a sarcastic comment, or maybe someone says something that where they're maybe just aren't thinking about how it'll land, or they're not understanding how it's going to um, be interpreted by someone. But I'm thinking, like, even as you were talking about the team that you had, and you have someone who's very detail oriented, you have these different sort of strengths and gifts on the team, right? But of course, with any strength or gift comes the opposing weaknesses, or I think you kind of even mentioned like the things that like create pet peeves, right? And so I'm curious how have you, so like someone who's like, okay, all about the vision, right? We're like, oh, we can change the world together, right? That person sitting at a table with the person who's like, yeah, but the bank account says this, right? Like, and you and like just in that starts can create this tension, right? And And we often even moralize it like, man, you're irresponsible because you're just not even looking at what reality is, or oh, you're not walking by faith because you're so stuck in what you see that you, right? Like, and we can start to moralize. And so I'm just curious, even maybe, like, have you seen those kinds of differences happen when you're trying to collaborate with people who are different? Or, and that's just personality, right? It can come out on culture, gender, um, generation, but have you seen those kinds of differences come out? And then anything you would add about how you tend to sort of maybe hold and honor the good and show grace for the weakness, or how do you navigate it? I mean, that's what comes to my mind initially, but maybe there's a whole other thing. What do you think about those kinds of situations?
I have seen and have participated in, if I'm honest, right?
Hmm.
Deeming my way of engaging in a collaborative space as good and someone else's as bad, um, or moralizing. I love that phrase that you use, just like kind of attributing morality to whether or not this way is right or that way is right. And I think we're all prone to do that. I think if I'm honest, as Christians, there might be a higher temptation in some ways because we have this book that we use. And anytime we see anything in the book that supports what we think, we pull that piece of the book out and wrap it across our foreheads and run through our relationships and our spaces, uh, declaring that we're good and we're right and we are fine because we've got this one sentence or these two or three sentences that were in the book. And so, and I love the Word of God. I don't think it was given to us so that we could define morality around ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so, I don't, do I have an answer for how do we navigate that when it comes up? I would say, this is maybe this is the moment I'm in, maybe in 5 years, my response will change. But I think today, in the season that I'm in today, I'm a lot more cautious about who I collaborate with. My consulting team, we're really careful about clients that we take and clients that we won't take, and projects that we'll take on and projects that we won't. And then this initiative that I'm a part of with Atlanta Collaborative District, we really do have some guardrails and values that we look at pretty carefully before we're bringing people to the table to design and contribute and mold with us. Because the I think there are parts of humility that can be taught and they can be modeled. I think there are other aspects of humility that they have to be chosen and they have to be like committed to. And it takes like a measure of self awareness and a measure of trust. Like, I think people who really struggle with trust will generally not contribute well to a collaborative space. And the reason for that is you have to trust that sometimes you're going to be wrong. You have to trust that even when the group isn't going in your direction, it can still all work out beautifully. Not just okay, but beautifully. You have to trust that your particular opinion doesn't have to be centered in every stage of the work for the work itself to become fruitful. You have to trust that people had good intentions, and then when they apologize, they mean it. And I I do think, I mean, you've walked with me in multiple moments, Ruth, where you've reminded me to trust. And I think in a collaborative space, when you have like too many folks who don't trust, it just can decay really quickly. And I would say it's not only folks, like trust is not binary. It's not like, oh, do people trust or do they not? It's also like you could have trusting people in a structure where trust is not protected. So I think there's multiple components to it, but I don't know that I have an answer for like, oh, what do we do when people are moralizing their particular way of working? You know, as we work with our clients, we would contextualize and kind of work through whatever solution makes is appropriate for them. But I don't know that there's a one size fits all response to those moments.
I feel like I've seen an unawareness sometimes about then how people might show up when they are in the group that tends to either be resourced or be, I mean, be in power, right? Like I don't want to use a polarizing word, but like I've seen this, for instance, when like, okay, we have like six pastors around the table, and one of the pastors is from a church that just has a lot of wealth and members, right? Okay, so that's just a financial power and resource that they come with. And and a lot of times that pastor isn't aware that they are like showing up at the table in a way that feels different to others at the table, whether they mean to or not. Does that make sense to you? So when maybe even just speak to that, because I don't think, like, I've seen it happen before where that maybe that pastor who comes from a large church, they're not like feeling like, oh, I'm wagging a big stick, right? And yet the people in the room sort of almost respond to that person's presence in that. So can you speak to that just to help us, like to help us have awareness of maybe how that can feel to others around the table and what that maybe some, I don't even know where to go with that, but just like some ways to be conscious and aware for whoever it is. Now, that's one example, but again, it could be a number of things of like whoever's in sort of the like resourced or power position. And a resource as in like, because everybody brings resources, right? But
Yeah. The dynamic with privilege, whether you have a financial privilege, whether you have a size of church privilege, whether you have gender related privilege, whatever privilege you're coming in with, I think the goal with privilege is the first thing is like, do you know you have it?
right.
Are you
Yep.
open to hearing about areas where you're privileged, right? I think it's very easy sometimes as a Black woman in this country for me, I could easily listen to some social media and only hear about how not privileged I am as a Black woman.
Hmm.
And in reality, I have to like sit quietly and remind myself there are spaces in my city where I am way more privileged than you, Ruth. I am way more privileged than
Mhm.
some of these wealthy, white, like power wielding men that I collaborate with in some of the spaces in our city. Like, I can get stuff done, I can say things, I can move the needle on things in some spaces in my community and in some relationships a lot faster than other folks. And that means that in those spaces, I'm carrying the privilege. Um,
Right.
Also, I have a measure of privilege around my wealth in certain spaces that other Black sisters, brothers of mine, Latin American brothers and sisters, Asian American brothers and sisters might not have. And so I think it's
Mhm.
like, are we willing to hear about our privilege? Are we willing to explore how our privilege looks and shows up? And are we willing to like take
Mm.
time to consider not just how does Zakiya's privilege show up, but when someone in Zakiya's profile walks into a room, what are the common experiences of the other stakeholders? What are the common perceptions of the other stakeholders? And how can I be conscious? Maybe I'm not changing who I am
Yeah.
to accommodate what they expect of me, but how can I be conscious of what they might experience based on my profile? And I think that takes a willingness to think beyond like Zakiya and Zakiya's intentions. And it
Yep.
requires me thinking like, yeah, I'm sitting in spaces right now where there's a particular demographic of people who feel like they are experiencing reverse prejudice. And if I
Hmm.
truly care about collaborating well with them, and I truly care about honoring them as I honor others, I'm not going to disregard that they feel like they're experiencing reverse racism, even though they've been at the top of our societal structure for 420 years or however long, 403 years, however long. I'm not going to
Right.
disregard it. That doesn't mean I'm going to cater to it, but I'm not going to disregard that that's what they're experiencing.
When I was in college or my college age years, right? I had these roommates, and if you, I don't know if you're familiar with the disc profile, but D is dominant, I is inspiring, S is more like steady, and then C is like your kind of analytical person, right? So I'm a D. One of my roommates was an I, and then one of my roommates was an SC, and it's been 20 some years, and we're still best friends. But what was so interesting is initially I was like, I cannot get my head around. So I'm like, I need to get things done. I'm moving, all those things. And I just could not get my head around the fact that one of my roommates could sit on the couch for 12 hours watching Friends and like not feel like she wasn't like, I'm like, how can you feel okay with your existence right now that you're contributing not contributing to society in any way, right? This was my way. And my other roommate would like she would it would just take her forever to process through and she would take forever to communicate things, and I'd be like, or she'd be late everywhere, and for me I was like that was just not okay. And when we took the disc test and I was like, oh, there's lots of people like this. Like it's not like she has some soul defect. Like this is a whole
Yes.
group of people, and it's a normal. Like she's very normal. And oh, also from the D perspective, I have weaknesses too, right? Like it just was like this very big eye opener. But I feel like that happens talking about like culturally, or when one person shows up, and you were talking about that with the gaslighting, but it's almost like you can bring your perspective to the table, and it's like, well, that's just the Kia. Not like, no, there's like a whole bunch of people who would agree with this perspective. And it should not be minimized so quickly just because it's not part of your perspective, right? And anyways, I think that you're really wise in that idea that there really needs to be, I mean, and also too, right? I mean, I think sometimes that happens just because, like, I don't know a lot of people who are
Mm-hmm.
different from me in different spaces, right? So I'm like, who's the one, right,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And I think there has to be there's a whole conversation that can be had around that. Um, but also, I think sometimes we can get into this perspective of like, um, I'm like, well, if I really value, if I'm not just sort of trying to check a box, but I really see the
Mm-hmm.
value of the difference that comes from different people's opinions, then I'm not gonna just settle for having the minimal
Right.
possible difference, right?
Right.
Like I'm going to value and treasure having a lot of difference and a lot of different opinions at the table. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Ruth, yes. Yes, yes,
mhm,
yes, yes. To everything you just said. Everything. Yes. And we live, I don't think we realize like the reality of how deep this idea of democracy is in us. And so we truly in our hearts have this ingrained perspective of majority rule and like
mhm,
normalize the majority. Like we normalize what the majority thinks. We normalize that is literally how we see life. And I'm not going to attribute whether that's good or bad. I'm just going to say that is not always bearing kingdom fruit in our spaces because you could
right,
have
right.
someone who is in the minority who is spot on with some things to consider, weigh, change, adjust, etc. But because we have this ingrained majority rule thing in us, we dismiss
Mhm.
people who are in the minority. And I'm not just talking ethnic, like ethnic or racial realities. It's like if I have six children in a classroom and one of them says, something and the other five aren't saying something, I'm going to lean toward dismissing or diminishing. Maybe I don't completely dismiss, but I will diminish that because there's more people who think this way. And I love what you said. It's like getting ourselves to the place where we say, you know what, that one child is saying this, but what if there's a whole group, a whole big group of people who are experiencing this like this, or um,
Mhm. Yeah.
and it goes so deeply against our cultural norms because we literally we've grown up voting, and whatever gets the most votes wins.
It's amazing how some of those kinds of like just the space we're formed in has implications into all of these kinds of different spaces. Um, just any other things, mistakes people tend to make that you want to mention at a high level? It's okay if there's not, but just wanted to give space for that in case there was anything else burning in your head.
I think
Hmm.
there are some questions around collaborative spaces that if we were willing to start answering these questions, we would be a lot we would be a lot more careful in our collaboration. Like, who are we comfortable saying, like, if somebody is going to say, yeah, we got overlooked and our perspective wasn't considered, or yeah, the process of collaboration was pretty painful for us. If somebody is going to say that, who are we okay with saying that?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if our answer is no one, or if our answer is as few people as possible, what structures are we going to put in place to achieve that response, right? Versus just
Yep.
assuming that we're not going to dismiss people and assuming that we're not going to diminish people and assuming that we're not centering, assuming Jesus is being centered. He's not.
Right.
He's not even here, guys.
If people walk away from nothing else from the conversation but just that question, I feel like that would leave us with so much to think about and so much opportunity for just like rigorously interrogating our choices and how we're showing up, right? That's so good. Um, so so it can be hard, right? It's hard. We've been talking a little bit like these are mistakes. These are the tough things, but so what makes it worth it? Like, would it be better just go at it on our own? What makes it worth it staying in and being patient and even having people tell us we're wrong about things or that they were hurt by us? Like, I don't know about, sometimes I'm like, that feels painful. So what makes it worth it?
Um, there's two pictures that come to mind. One is just the picture of a strong building, right? Um, there are parts of the scriptures that just talk about the people of God being a refuge from the storms of life. The church that my parents raised me in, its mission was to be a refuge for humans during the storms of life. And in order to build a sturdy refuge, like tents can't be a strong refuge. They just can't. Most tents. I'm not talking about Bedouin tents, but the Target tents that you go camping with. They can't be a strong refuge, but a building can be a strong refuge, and a building that's built well can be a strong refuge. And within strong refuge, you can bring out the best of people. Like when people experience safety and refuge, they tend to be and become and grow into and produce their best selves. And everybody benefits. And I think um, that is it the wins and the joy of watching people be their best selves like cannot be understated, and it is worth the sacrifice. I think the other analogy that's coming to my mind, and you might know this, so In Mozambique, it's called shima. In Kenya, it's this white food, and it goes. I'm trying to think of the word. Oh, I'm gonna think of it as soon as we finish this. But there's this dish in Mozambique called shima, and it's basically like a cornmeal. It's a very fine cornmeal, and generally the women in Mozambique, when they're making it, they have to do like really intense stirring, and they have to do like really intense beating, and it is exhausting. Making it is like it is tiresome. They would not say it's exhausting. I'm gonna say it's tiresome to make this food. But the food, when it's been made, has such a profound substance to it that it is worth the effort that's put in. And I mean, it's a profound amount of substance. Like families during famine and during seasons of like the dry seasons, the Mozambican culture lives on this dish, this substance. It's almost like a grit like hard grit like base to every meal. And it's the main source of like substance, truly. Um, and then they might saute leaves and vegetables and stuff like that, like to put on top of stuff like that to put on top. But it's the substance. And I think about collaboration and I'm like, if we're talking about, being the bread that's going to multiply for our cities and our nation and our families, the bread comes from collaborative spaces, like collaborating with the Spirit of God, collaborating with um, people who know God and people who don't. It comes from collaborating.
That's good. And it's something I thought, even it was like just an aside thing that you said, but you were like, well, they wouldn't say it's exhausting, right? And I think that there's something really profound there because I think doing anything new, our
Mhm.
muscles are weak at it, right? So it's exhausting. It
Mhm.
feels really hard. But the more that we do it, the more our muscle capacity expands to be able to handle it. And then it doesn't
Mhm.
feel so hard anymore, right? And so I think that even that is just a good reminder that even if it feels hard at the beginning, the longer we stay in it, the more muscle capacity we will build for doing it, and it will feel less hard over
Yeah.
time, right?
Ruth,
As with most
yes.
things.
Yeah. And
So
I would also say, like, and I want to be careful here to not, I don't want to attribute morality. And I would say, you show me, particularly, you show me a Christian who's unwilling to learn how to collaborate, and I'll show you a Christian who might not know Jesus the way they think they do.
that's a strong statement.
I
Why
don't,
do you say
I
that?
think a lot of the practice of loving God with all of who we are and loving our neighbor as ourselves requires collaboration of us.
Mm,
I just do. I think Paul talks about 1 Corinthians 12. He
mm,
talks about being a body, and the members of a
yeah,
physical body do collaborate with each other. They do. And there's tons of
yep.
research, secular and like Christian oriented. There's tons of research around how our body is actually connected. And so to say that we are loving God, like my husband and I call them the big three, like love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, love your neighbor as yourself, and then go and make disciples. I don't know that we can be doing and growing and increasingly manifesting the big three and push collaboration
Mm,
to the side as something that's not necessary. Now, that doesn't mean in every single area of our life we are practicing collaboration. I think there are parts of my walk with God that are just between me and the Lord. But even those parts that are between just me and
mhm.
the Lord, they are fortified by the other parts that are between me and humans.
Yeah, yep, yep. Yep. I would agree. I mean, I agree in so many ways, and I do think that the body analogy, it's actually, I was actually going to just write on that this week, is like, this is like the most beautiful picture of collaborate. Like, our hand cannot function on its own. Our brain, no matter how beautiful and like Gloria says it is, cannot function without our body, right? Like they have to work together, and they're very distinctly different, and they contribute different things, but the connectivity of them and the interdependence of them working together is what allows us to live in the world, right? And so yeah, no, I agree. And we could go on for a long time, but we've been, so let me just finish on because we could just keep talking. But so so like just for leaders who might be listening, can you give a couple of concrete things that those leaders could start to do if they want to move towards collaboration? Um, Anything that we haven't talked about already that might be concrete.
I'm a big believer in gathering feedback. So, probably the first thing that I would say is if I were leading something, which I am, but if I were starting from ground zero, I think if you're a Christian, which I believe our audience is Christian, so as a believer, I think the first
Mm-hmm.
step to moving toward collaboration is just asking the Holy Spirit, one, to open our eyes to opportunities to collaborate that we've not seen and overlooked. And not, and when I say collaborate, I don't mean like build together. I mean like open our eyes to people we haven't seen and we've overlooked. Open our eyes to
Mm-hmm.
dynamics that we haven't seen and we've overlooked. Open our eyes to the realities around us. Open our eyes. Um, I think that's just asking the Holy Spirit to open our eyes. I think the next one would be asking the Holy Spirit to really start going before us and making a way. I think then it's asking for the relationships. And I think with asking for the relationships, the practical step beyond prayer would be I love getting feedback from people. And I would say, think about the person in your midst who feels the most different from you. Pray, first of all, for them, and then reach out to them and say, hey, can we get together? I'd love to have coffee. And my goal here is to see things I just haven't been seeing and to get to know you. And I'm pretty sure I have a lot to learn. And I don't need you to be my teacher. I just need you to connect with me and share as freely as you're willing to about whatever you'd like. And I will come with curiosity. And I will also come with a commitment to take what I learn from you and go do my own additional learning. And I also would love to understand from your perspective, what do you think I'm not seeing that I need to maybe consider? And that's kind of a, that's like, it's not easy. It takes courage, but I think that that's a small start. I think the prayer is huge. I think those coffees, and I think practice that for 6 months before you build anything. Just practice like connecting with people who are so different than you, and practice going beyond the coffees, right? Like, I think the coffees are just a start. Prayer and coffees are just a start. The goal would be that that's entering the shallow end of the pool, and you're progressing toward more. You're progressing toward not just coffee hangouts, but actual relationship and interaction and recurring stuff. And you're finding yourself going and like participating in that person's things before you build anything. Just go participate in what they're doing. Go be a follower of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think as we do that, the opportunities to collaborate, those will naturally come. But I think it has to start with like recognizing we've been practicing a spiritual blindness, we need help. Recognizing that there is a savior who goes before us and opens doors and connects and stuff like that. And then just taking really small steps and being faithful with them.
Thank you, Zakiya, for having this conversation. Thanks, even just from leading from vulnerability, from how you've made mistakes or you've had to grow and learn yourself. And I just feel like, again, I know I started the conversation with this, but I think it just can't be stated enough that we are human beings, and because of our humanness, we have limitations, we have blind spots, and we make mistakes. And so the mistakes in some ways are okay. It's just sort of like what kind of posture are we going to walk with in the midst of it? Will that be a posture where we are just seeking to continue to hear and listen and grow, or um, yeah, will it be that posture? I won't even say the opposite, right? But so thank you for having the conversation and even just processing through so much of this. I think collaboration is so rich, and like I just love your initial thought of just it being sturdy, like creating sturdiness and longevity and fruit. There's like substance to those words that like sits with me in a powerful way. So um, anyways, I'm excited to just get to journey with you in all of this, and in in some ways, as we're even just trying to think through how do we collaborate in the city, how do we live life for the flourishing of others. And yeah, so thanks for just being with us. And thanks for those of you who are tuning in. And if there's ways that we can help process through as you're on the journey, we would love to do that. We're happy to be in it with you, mistakes and all, and see the just glorious things that God creates out of that collaboration, both out in the world, but also the glorious things He creates within us in our own lives. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.